The mountains in northern Alaska were covered in white snow as far as the eyes could see. It was the kind of cold that felt like it could pass through skin and bones, sinking straight into the heart. The winter season had arrived far earlier than usual, surprising even the people who had lived there all their lives. The air was sharp, each breath turning into clouds of white mist. A heavy snowstorm had rolled in without warning, covering trails, hiding the path, and swallowing the world in swirling white. Liam, a wildlife photographer, was out that day with his camera, looking for moose tracks. He had spent years chasing rare moments in the wild, traveling to faraway places where most people wouldn't dare to go in winter. He had a small cabin deep in the forest, and he often spent weeks alone in nature, taking photographs of animals in their natural habitat. That morning he had left his cabin early, thinking he would return before the weather turned bad. But nature had its own plans. As he walked back through the deep snow, the wind roared around him, pulling at his coat and making it hard to see. Snowflakes stung his face like tiny shards of ice. His boots sank with each step, making progress slow. Liam was focused on getting home quickly when something caught his attention. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a shape lying near a cluster of frozen bushes. At first, he thought it was just a fallen branch or maybe a snow-covered log. But something about the way it was shaped made him stop. He squinted through. The blowing snow, his photographer's instincts telling him this was something unusual. Slowly, he trudged closer, his heart beginning to beat faster. When he reached the spot, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a branch or a log. It was a person. A woman was lying in the snow, her clothes dusted white, her body still, except for a faint trembling. Her skin was pale, her lips had turned a bluish color, and her eyes were barely open. She looked so weak, as if she had been out there for hours. Liam dropped to his knees beside her. "Hey, can you hear me?" He called over the wind, his voice urgent. Her lips moved slightly, but the words were too soft for him to understand. He could see that she was shivering violently, a sign that her body was fighting to keep warm. But he also knew that soon, if she didn't get help, she would stop shivering altogether. That was when hypothermia became deadly. The snowstorm seemed to grow louder around them, as if the world was closing in. Liam quickly took off his spare coat from his backpack and wrapped it around her. The fabric was warm from being close to his own body, but he knew it wasn't enough. She needed shelter, and she needed it fast. Her hands were icy cold when he touched them, and her boots were wet through. It was clear she had been walking for a long time without the right gear for such weather. He felt a rush of urgency. There was no time to think about how or why she had ended up here. The only thing that mattered was getting her to safety. "Hang on," he told her firmly, trying to keep her awake. "You're going to be okay. I'm going to get you out of here." Liam wasn't a large man, but adrenaline and determination gave him strength. He carefully lifted her, wrapping his arms under her shoulders and knees, then adjusted her so she was over his back in a secure carry. She was lighter than he expected, which made him worry about how long she had gone without proper food or warmth. With the snow swirling around them, Liam started the long trek back to his cabin. Each step was a struggle. His boots sank deep into the snow, and the extra weight made him feel like he was moving through quicksand. The wind howled in his ears, making it hard to hear anything else. The woman's head rested against his shoulder, and he could feel her breathing, weak, but still there. Every few minutes he spoke to her, telling her to stay awake, to keep fighting. "Just a little farther. You're doing great. We're almost there." He didn't know if she could hear him, but he hoped his voice was something for her to hold on to. The cabin was still far away, and the path was harder to see with the storm wiping out all familiar landmarks. Liam relied on memory, recalling the shapes of the trees and the slope of the land beneath the snow. His legs ached, his shoulders burned, but he refused to stop. In the silence between gusts of wind, he could hear his own heart pounding. He thought about how easily he could have missed her. If he had walked just a few meters in another direction, she might have been buried by snow before morning. The thought sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the weather. At last, through the blur of white, Liam saw the dark outline of his cabin. Relief washed over him, but he didn't slow down. The hardest part was still ahead, getting her inside and warm before it was too late. He pushed through the final stretch, the snow up to his knees, until he reached the door. Fumbling with one hand, he managed to unlock it and step inside, the sudden stillness of the cabin a sharp contrast to the wild storm outside. The warmth from the small fire he had left earlier was fading, but it was better than the bitter cold they had just escaped. Liam gently laid the woman on the rug near the fireplace, her breathing shallow, her eyes barely open. Snow clung to her hair and eyelashes, melting slowly in the warmer air. He moved quickly to stoke the fire back to life, knowing that every second still mattered. For the first time since finding her, Liam allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. She was here, out of the storm and still breathing. Now came the real challenge, keeping her alive through the night. Liam knelt beside the woman, the sound of the wind still howling outside the cabin walls. He could see that her skin was still frighteningly pale, and her lips trembled as she tried to whisper something. He leaned closer, but the words were too broken to understand. Her eyelids drooped, and it was clear she was struggling to stay awake. The fire crackled weakly in the corner, but the heat wasn't yet strong enough to fight off the deep cold that had settled in her body. Liam grabbed more logs from the pile, near the wall, and fed them into the flames. The dry wood caught quickly, and soon the fire glowed brighter, casting warm light across the small room. He remembered from his survival training that hypothermia wasn't just about feeling cold. It was when the body's core temperature dropped dangerously low. Once it reached a certain point, the person could slip into unconsciousness, and waking them again would be nearly impossible. Time was still against him. "Stay with me," Liam said firmly, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're safe now. Just stay awake." Her eyes flickered open for a moment, but then closed again. He knew he needed to act fast. The wet snow on her clothes was the enemy. It would keep pulling heat away from her body no matter how warm the room became. He found an old wool blanket and wrapped it around her as tightly as possible, tucking the edges in so no cold air could slip through. Then he moved quickly to prepare hot water. He filled a metal pot from the container he kept for drinking water and set it on the fire. While it heated, he looked at her boots, thin, worn, and soaked through. Her socks were damp as well. Liam carefully removed them and found another pair from his supplies, thick and dry. He worked as gently as he could, not wanting to cause her any more pain, but every movement made her wince slightly. Minutes passed, and the pot began to steam. He poured the hot water into a cup and mixed it with some dried herbal leaves he kept for tea. Then he helped her sit up, supporting her back so she wouldn't fall. "Try to drink this," he said softly. "It will help warm you from the inside." Her hands were too cold and weak to hold the cup, so Liam guided it to her lips. She took a small sip, then another. The warmth seemed to make her blink more often, though her body was still shaking. The storm outside continued to rage, the wind rattling, the wooden shutters. Liam knew they weren't going anywhere tonight, not even if the storm calmed. The snow was already too deep, and she wouldn't be able to walk. The only choice was to keep her alive here until she was strong enough to leave. He adjusted the blankets and then placed a heated stone wrapped in cloth near her feet. This was an old trick he had learned from hunters in the north. The stone would release heat slowly, helping her warm up without shocking her system. As he worked, Liam's mind kept going back to the moment he had found her. If he had been just 10 minutes later, if the snow had been heavier, she might have disappeared from sight completely. He wondered how long she had been out there, and whether she had been alone the whole time. The woman stirred slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where am I?" "You're in my cabin," Liam replied gently. "You were caught in the snow. I brought you here so you wouldn't freeze." Her brow furrowed as if she were trying to remember something, but she didn't speak again. Liam could see the exhaustion in her face. It was the kind of tiredness that came not just from physical strain, but from fighting against the cold for too long. The hours crawled by as night fell. Liam stayed close to the fire, keeping the flames strong and the air warm. Every so often he checked on her breathing, relieved each time he felt the faint rise and fall of her chest. He offered her more tea when she was awake enough, and once he managed to get her to eat a few spoonfuls of hot soup. Around midnight, the storm seemed to grow even louder, the wind whistling through the cracks in the cabin walls. The roof creaked under the weight of fresh snow. Liam glanced at the door, hoping it would hold against the fierce weather, but his main focus remained on the woman. She was still shivering, but the trembling was a little less violent now. That meant her body was slowly gaining back some warmth. "Just a bit longer," he said quietly, almost to himself. "You're going to make it." At one point, she opened her eyes and looked at him, her gaze unfocused but searching. Why did you help me?" she asked in a slow, weak voice. Liam didn't think twice before answering. "Because you needed it, and because no one should be left alone in a storm like this." She didn't respond, but her eyes softened slightly before she drifted back into sleep. By the time dawn approached, the snow outside had stopped falling, but the wind was still sharp and cold. Liam knew that the danger hadn't passed completely. Her body was still fragile, and it would take time before she was truly safe. But he also knew that the worst of the night was behind them. He leaned back in his chair near the fire, exhaustion settling into his own limbs. Yet, despite the tiredness, he felt a quiet relief. She was alive, and as long as she stayed in this cabin, he would make sure she stayed that way. Morning light slipped through the small gaps in the wooden shutters, spilling faint golden lines across the cabin floor. The storm had finally quieted, though the world outside was still buried in thick snow. Liam opened his eyes slowly, realizing he had fallen asleep in the chair beside the fire. His neck ached, and his clothes felt stiff from the cold night before. The first thing he did was look at the woman lying on the rug near the fire. She was still wrapped in the heavy wool blanket, her breathing steady and a little stronger than last night. Her face no longer looked as pale as before, and a faint flush had returned to her cheeks. It was a good sign. Her body was fighting its way back from the edge. Liam quietly stood, adding more wood to the fire so the warmth wouldn't fade. The flames flared up, filling the cabin with a gentle glow and a comforting crackle. He checked. The heated stone at her feet. It was still warm, though not as hot as before. Carefully, he replaced it with a fresh one from the fire, wrapping it again in cloth before tucking it under the blanket. He decided to make breakfast, something hot and light. From his supplies, he pulled out a small pot, some dried vegetables, and rice. As he prepared the food, the sound of the simmering soup filled the air along with a faint smell that made the cabin feel less lonely. A soft voice broke the silence. "Where am I?" Liam turned quickly. She was awake, her eyes slightly more alert than the night before. "You're in my cabin," he replied, keeping his tone calm. "You were caught in the snowstorm yesterday. I found you outside almost frozen." Her eyes moved around the room slowly, as if taking in the wooden walls, the shelves of supplies, and the snow-covered window. I remember walking," she murmured. "And then, nothing." "You collapsed," Liam said. "You've Been here since yesterday evening. You need to rest. She tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled. He moved closer, holding her shoulder gently. Easy. You're still weak. Drink something first. From the table, he brought a mug of warm water with a little honey stirred in. She took it with both hands, though her grip was unsteady. The warmth seemed to comfort her, and she drank slowly. When the soup was ready, Liam served it in a bowl and handed it to her. Eat as much as you can. It'll help. She took a few careful spoonfuls, then glanced at him. You carried me here? Yes, he said simply. There was no other choice. For a moment, she stared into the bowl as if thinking about something deeply. Thank you, she whispered, her voice almost lost in the crackle of the fire. Liam nodded, but didn't press her for more. He knew from experience that people who had just survived something dangerous often needed time before they could talk. Still, he couldn't help but wonder how she had ended up in the middle of the wilderness during one of the worst storms of the year. They sat quietly for a while, the only sounds being the fire, the occasional creak of the cabin, and the faint rustle of wind outside. After she finished eating, she leaned back against a pillow Liam had placed behind her. What's your name? She asked, her voice steadier now. Liam, he said. And yours? Ilara, she replied softly. It was a name he didn't hear often. He stored it in his mind, certain it carried a story. Ilara, what were you doing out there? He asked gently. Her gaze shifted toward the window, where the light revealed swirling snowflakes still falling lightly from the sky. It's complicated, she said after a pause. I came here looking for someone, but I took the wrong trail. The storm hit before I could turn back. Liam listened, but didn't push for details. You're lucky I found you, he said. Another hour and, well, things could have been different. Ilara nodded slowly as if the truth of his words was sinking in. I thought I wouldn't make it, she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. You made it, Liam replied firmly. That's what matters now. He spent the rest of the morning tending to the cabin. He melted more snow for water, checked his supplies, and made sure the firewood pile was still, large enough to last. Ilara dozed off again at one point, her breathing deep and peaceful, the kind of rest that only came after surviving something life-threatening. By midday, the light outside had grown brighter, but the snow still lay deep and untouched. Liam stepped outside briefly to check the conditions. The cold air bit at his skin immediately, but the storm clouds had begun to break apart, revealing patches of pale blue sky. He took the chance to gather more wood and clear a small path around the cabin before returning inside. When he came back, Ilara was sitting up a little more, looking around with curious eyes. It's so quiet here, she said softly. It is, Liam agreed. That's why I live here. No traffic, no noise, just the wind, the trees, and the animals. A faint smile touched her lips. It's peaceful, even after what happened. Liam sat across from her, feeling that she was slowly opening up. You'll be safe here until you're ready to move again, but it might be a couple of days before the snow is easy to walk through. She nodded, a look of relief on her face. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there. Liam shrugged slightly. Sometimes people cross paths at the right moment. Maybe this was one of those times. As the day went on, Ilara grew stronger, speaking more and eating better. The warmth of the fire had done its work, and the color in her face continued to return. Outside, the snow reflected the pale light of the winter sun, and inside, a quiet sense of safety began to fill the cabin. Liam knew the worst was over, but something told him Ilara's story was far from finished. Ilara sat quietly by the fire, the soft glow lighting her face as she slowly sipped the warm tea Liam had made. She seemed more alert now, her eyes no longer glassy from the cold, but filled with a quiet sadness. Liam watched her carefully, knowing that the moment to ask about her story had come. She took a deep breath and began to speak in a low voice. "I came to Alaska looking for my friend," she said slowly. "Her name is Anna. She disappeared months ago, and no one knew where she had gone. I thought maybe I could find her." Liam listened intently as she explained how Anna had been living in a small town near the edge of the wilderness. They had grown up together but lost touch as life took them in different directions. When Alara heard that Anna had gone missing, she couldn't stop thinking about her. So, she decided to come here, hoping to follow any clues. She described how she had asked locals for help and learned of a trail that might lead to where Anna had last been seen. But the trail was rough and the weather unpredictable. Ilara admitted she wasn't prepared for the storm that struck while she was following the path. "I got lost," she said softly. "I tried to find my way back, but the snow kept falling, and the wind pushed me further away." Liam nodded slowly, understanding the dangers of the wilderness in winter. "You were very brave to come alone," he said, "but it's easy to get caught off guard by nature." She looked at him with tired eyes. "I didn't want to give up on her, not without trying." For a while they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Liam admired Alara's courage but worried about how much she had already endured. He knew the forest could be both beautiful and merciless. As the day passed, Alara's strength grew, and she shared more stories of her life and the friendship she had with Anna. Liam told her about his own years living in the wilderness, the quiet moments he treasured, and the dangers he always respected. They found comfort in each other's company, two strangers brought together by chance and the harshness of the cold. Later, Liam helped Ilara prepare for the coming days. "You'll need warm clothes and proper boots before you try to travel again," he said. "The snow is deep and it's easy to get lost even when the sky is clear." She nodded, her determination shining through despite her weakness. "I want to find her. I have to." Liam didn't say anything but promised to help her get ready when she was stronger. For now, rest was the most important thing. The next morning, the storm had passed completely. Outside, the world was bright and still, with sunlight sparkling on the thick layer of untouched snow. Liam and Alara prepared for her journey back to town. He packed extra supplies, food, water, and warm clothing, and checked the map carefully. Ilara looked more like herself now, her cheeks rosy, her eyes clearer. Yet there was still a quiet sadness beneath her strength. Liam could see how much the search for Anna meant to her. They left the cabin together, stepping carefully through the snow. Liam showed her the safest paths, places to avoid, and signs to watch for. The forest was silent except for the crunch of their boots in the snow and the occasional call of a bird. As they walked, Ilara spoke of her hopes and fears. She wasn't sure what she would find once she returned to town, but knew she had to try. Liam listened, offering words of encouragement and sharing stories of survival and hope from his own experiences. After several hours, they reached the edge of the forest, where the snow was thinner and signs of human life returned. Alara turned to Liam with a grateful smile. "Thank you for saving me," she said simply. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." Liam smiled back. "Sometimes all we need is a little help when we're in the darkest moments." Before parting ways, Ilara promised to return to the cabin once she had found out more about Anna. Liam watched her walk away, the small figure disappearing into the white landscape. As he turned back to his cabin, Liam felt a deep sense of peace. The storm had tested both of them in different ways, but it had also brought them together. And in the coldest place on earth, A simple act of kindness had warmed two lives forever.